Good afternoon, parents and students. I hope everyone can hear me. This is Miss Wren. I'm happy to welcome all of you here to tonight's presentation. In just a couple of minutes, we'll get started. And our presenter is Mrs. Ann Carmichael, who's very knowledgeable in the area of FAFSA. So she's going to be able to provide all of you some very good information. So when Ms. Carmichael is ready, she'll go ahead and get us started. I just want to make you aware that there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll do everything we can to get those answered for you this evening. So thank you so much. I ask that you have your mute off so that we can hear everything that Ms. Carmichael has to share with us. So thank you all so very much for being here this evening.
Thank you so much for inviting me to present this evening. And if you don't mind, I'm going to give it just one more minute to see if anyone else will join us. Okay, again, my name is Ann Carmichael, and I am presenting tonight on behalf of LELA. LELA is Louisiana's nonprofit resource for Fafsa Completion and college access. Now, I'm going to be covering the highlights of college financial aid and just touching on the different components of the Fafsa. As Ms. Wren mentioned earlier, we're going to have a question and answer period after the presentation. But if you want to go ahead and drop your comments or questions in the Zoom chat box, that will be a way for us to go through those and try to address each. Now, if you prefer to speak to me individually, I'm going to provide my contact information to you toward the end. Now, we all know that college can be expensive, so it's great that you all are here thinking about the costs of pursuing a post-secondary education. And those costs are going to include the student's equipment, books, and supplies, any personal expenses. You may be living away from home, and some of you might be responsible for paying your own phone bill, doing your own laundry, purchasing fuel to get back and forth to campus. Then there's your room and board. So if you're staying on campus, you will have to pay for your dormitory. If you're staying away from home, but perhaps you're living in an apartment, you will have that expense plus maybe utilities, etc. Then your tuition and fees. And most often, a college's tuition will be listed on their webpage, but you might not always see those other expenses or the fees that you're going to incur. And the fees can include your parking, library, technology, and athletic fees. And those can certainly add up. But the good news is that financial aid is available from the U.S. Department of Education, the state of Louisiana, in the form of the TOPS scholarship, your college or career school, and then nonprofit and private organizations like LELA. Now in 2020, we've heard that more than $115 billion in federal student aid was awarded. And we just want to make sure that the class of 2022 receives their portion. There are three different types of student financial aid. There's free money, borrowed money, and earned money. Types of federal student aid include the federal Pell Grant, the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, the Teacher Educational Assistance for College and Higher Education Grant, the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, Federal Work Study, and then direct subsidized, unsubsidized, and plus loans. Now, federal student aid grants are a form of financial aid that does not have to be repaid. So you always want to accept a grant offer. The federal grant family includes Pell Grants, which are for undergraduates with financial need, FSEOGs for undergraduates with exceptional financial need, service grants for students of military parents who died defending the country following 9/11, and then teach grants for students pursuing a teaching career. The Federal Work Study Program provides part-time jobs to help students pay for their education expenses. So when you answer yes on the FAFSA to Federal Work Study, the Financial Aid Office will consider you for available jobs on their campus. Then any monies that you earn from these jobs should be used to pay your college expenses. These monies go directly to the student in the form of a paycheck, usually bi-monthly. Now, I want to say these jobs look great on a student's first professional resume. So if the student is going to a four-year college and accepts a federal work study job, say it's in the financial aid office, that is 4 years of work history that you have to put on your first professional resume. So please consider this form of funding as well. Now, no one wants to have to borrow, but if you cannot complete your college degree without student loans, then they are a good investment. But the important thing to remember is to borrow only what you're going to need to complete your education. And it's important to understand the different types of loans that you could be offered. There's direct subsidized loans, which are based on financial need, and no interest is charged on this type of loan until the student graduates or ceases to attend. These are known as need-based loans. On the other hand, almost everyone is eligible for the direct unsubsidized loans. These loans, of course, do accrue interest while the student is in school and then throughout the life of the loan. And almost everyone is eligible for the direct unsubsidized loan. You can see that there is a big difference between the direct subsidized and the unsubsidized loans. And you need to remember that when a student receives his financial aid offer, that he is accepting all of the subsidized if needed first, and then only the portion of unsub that he might need to complete his academic year. You can remember this by telling yourself that the U in unsubsidized means that you always pay the interest on that loan. Now, if you do make the decision to accept loans, you could be offered federal student loans in addition to private student loans. You always want to accept the federal loan portion first because payments aren't due until you graduate or cease to attend. The interest rate is fixed at a lower rate and no credit check is required. So federal student loans are in the student's name only. On the other hand, if you are offered private loans, be aware that sometimes payments will be requested to be made while the student is still in school. The interest rate might be variable and often it's much higher, and they almost always require a cosigner. So make sure that you're doing your research before you are accepting any type of student loan to pay for your academic year. Now, All of this student financial aid can be used at public and private four-year colleges, community colleges, career and technical schools for part-time or online courses. And all federal student aid and most institutional and private aid is contingent upon completion of the free application for federal student aid or the Fafsa. Now, you probably already know that it launched on October 1st. And yes, we have plenty of students that have already completed their Fafsas. And the reason is that student financial aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis. So these Fafsas are date stamped and the colleges can see who has applied. Remember that you want to get this Fafsa done as soon as possible because some schools receive a limited amount of grant monies, and those will be awarded to students who have applied for it first. Now, you want to begin the Fafsa process by collecting all of the documents that you're going to need to complete the form. And by doing so, you should really spend no longer than 30 to 45 minutes before being able to go ahead and submit your Fafsa. And those documents include the student and parents' Social Security cards, because you must report your name and number exactly as it's printed on your most recent card. The student and parents' 2020 federal income tax returns, if you filed one. And if you haven't retained a copy of your return, now is a good time to go back to your tax preparer and get this before you start your Fafsa. And then you'll want to gather any bank statements and records of investments because you're going to be asked to report the balances of those accounts as of the date that you submit the Fafsa. You'll also need to gather your W-2s because there's information on this form that might not be listed on your income tax report. Now, you'll begin by creating your federal student aid ID. You can see the web address listed here. This ID is going to allow the student and parents to identify themselves electronically when they're accessing the Fafsa. The FSA ID will consist of a unique username and a password that you will create. And you want to use only your personal information. Now, every student and one of his parents needs to create an FSA ID. Remember that you don't want to share any information. Students don't use mom or dad's email address or their mobile phone anywhere within your ID. And same with the parents. You also do not want to use your school or business issued email account. Sometimes communications from federal student aid can get locked in your spam folders. So make sure, students, you're not using your high school account because that you may no longer have access to that once you graduate. And parents, please use your personal email addresses as well. The FSA ID is your official electronic signature, and it is legally binding. So you want to make sure that you're recording it because you're going to use it every year that the student is in college, and keep it in a really safe place. You don't want someone else to be able to access information that you have provided to federal student aid. Now, if you don't have access to a computer, you can always download the Fafsa Mobile App. It's really easy to use to submit your Fafsa either on your mobile phone or any other mobile device with internet access. And for some reason, when we receive calls about parents having trouble with the actual web-based version of the Fafsa, We always refer them to the app. So it's probably a good idea to go ahead and download the app just in case you need it. Or of course, you can use the web-based version. Here is the web address. And for those of you wondering, yes, you can use the mobile apps. Perhaps the student prefers the mobile app to enter his information. Mom or dad prefer the web-based version, because once it's time to sign and submit, all of your information will be integrated into one format. You'll want to begin the FAFSA by logging in with the student's FSA ID, because remember that the FAFSA is the student's application for federal student aid. Parents, you're going to use your ID if you choose to transfer your information from the IRS into the FAFSA, and then you'll use it again to sign the student's FAFSA. It's important to note that the class of 2022 should complete the 2022-23 FAFSA, because that's the academic year that you're applying for financial aid. If you select the 21-22 FAFSA, and this does happen because it can be confusing, the 21-22 application is for students who are in college this academic year. So make sure you don't make that mistake. You're going to see that there are 8 sections that need to be completed before submitting the FAFSA. And those are going to include the student demographic section, where the student will be asked to report his social security number, his name as listed on his card, his date of birth, personal email address, home address, residency status, and gender. Next, in the school selection section, the student will be asked to report the name of his high school, add any colleges that he wants his FAFSA data to be sent to, and his housing plans on each of those campuses. Next is the dependency status section, where the student will be asked to consider a list of 10 questions that are going to determine whether he is dependent or independent for FAFSA purposes. He'll be asked to report the number of dependents living in his household and his parents' education completion level. And this is used to determine whether he is a first-generation college student. Then you'll move on to the parent demographics, where they will be asked to report their social security numbers, their names as printed on their social security cards, their marital status, or if they're divorced or separated, they'll be asked to report those dates as well, and then their personal email addresses. Next, you're going to move into the parent and student financials, where you will each be asked to report your working wages from 2020, any federal benefits that you receive, and then a list of your savings and investment accounts and the balances of those. Then it's time to sign and submit the FAFSA. And once you do so, you'll receive confirmation. Now, as you move through the FAFSA, you're going to see a question mark beside every question. If you need a little bit more explanation about what is expected, you can always click on that question mark to get a better understanding. You can use the hyperlinks that are provided within the FAFSA. These might explain to you some legal terms or financial aid terms that you've not heard of before. You can request a FAFSA online chat. You can call Federal Student Aid, or you can contact us directly on Leela's FAFSA helpline. But for this session, I'm going to cover only the most commonly asked FAFSA questions. Now, as I mentioned, if you have one, please drop it in that Zoom chat box and we'll talk about it in just a few minutes. The student must be a citizen or eligible non-citizen to complete a FAFSA. Now, if you have a social security card, then you most probably are a US citizen. But do you feel like you could be an eligible non-citizen? This is one of the hyperlinks provided within the FAFSA. You can always click there. You can see the eligible non-citizen list here in this slide. Or if you want to speak to someone about your situation, you can definitely give us a call. But let's say that the student has identified that he is a citizen or an eligible non-citizen, but his parents are not. That's fine. The student can still submit their FAFSA. However, they will use zeros anywhere a parent's social security number is asked for. Now, as I mentioned, only the colleges that you list on the FAFSA in that school selection section are going to consider you for student financial aid. So you want to add all of the colleges that you're considering. Even if you haven't completed the admissions process, go ahead and list them on your FAFSA, because once you have completed the admissions process, they can pull down your financial information and begin considering you for a financial aid offer. Now, if you're applying to more than 10 colleges, there are instructions on this page as to how to do that, but you can only submit 10 colleges at a time. Next, I want to quickly go over the 10 questions that a student will be asked to consider to determine whether he's dependent or independent. Now, the first two will not pertain to high school seniors unless seniors are already married, which is probably not the case. So let's move down to number 3. Will you be working on a graduate degree? Sometimes students get a little confused as to what is meant by a graduate degree. This will be a master's or PhD. Do you, the student, have children who receive more than half of their support from you? Do you have dependents other than a child or a spouse who live with you and receive more than half of their support from you? And remember, they're asking the students these questions. Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? So if you're going on to boot camp or basic training, you still cannot select yes for this question because that is not active duty. Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a ward or a dependent of the court? Are you an emancipated minor, or are you in legal guardianship as determined by a court? And it's important to clarify that legal custody is not always considered legal guardianship. So make sure you have your legal documents with you when you're completing your FAFSA. And then the last one, are you an unaccompanied youth who is homeless, or are you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? Now, if you can answer yes to just one of those questions and you can provide a legal document supporting your claim, then you're considered an independent student and will not be required to provide parental information. However, if you're not in legal guardianship and you live with, say, grandparents or other relatives that have not legally adopted you, you still must provide information about your legal parents. And if you think that you could be in this situation and you want to speak to me directly, I'm happy to go over this with you as well. Now, for FAFSA purposes, even though you might file your own taxes as the student, or you live alone and support yourself by choice, you're still considered independent unless you can answer one of those prior 10 questions. But if you're in this situation, and you're in a unique situation, it's always okay to contact the financial aid office to discuss that with them. And then the most commonly asked question that we receive is, who is my parent when I complete the FAFSA? The rule of thumb is that the parent or parents that you've lived with the longest in the past 12 months should be listed on your FAFSA. So if you live with both of your biological parents, then that's easy. You're going to want to list both of those on your FAFSA. However, if the parent that you've lived with the longest in the past 12 months is either separated, divorced, or was never married, then you should list only that biological parent on your FAFSA. Now, if that parent is remarried, you must also include his or her spouse. In other words, your step parent, because federal student aid wants to know the financial standing of the household that the student has lived in the longest in the 12 months prior to the date that the FAFSA was submitted. If you're identified as a dependent student, you couldn't answer one of those 10 questions, but your parents will not provide information on the FAFSA. You can submit a FAFSA stating that you're unable to provide their info. However, you need to contact the college's financial aid office to discuss your situation, because if you don't, you're only going to be considered for the unsubsidized student loans. You want to remember that the FAFSA is only a vehicle to gather your demographic and financial information and provide it to the college financial aid office. They are the ones who are going to be making your aid offer. So make sure that if you have a special situation, you're contacting them directly. And to expedite the process of your federal student aid, it's important that the student and his parents use the IRS data retrieval tool to provide information if they filed a 2020 income tax return. Using this tool is going to greatly diminish the student's chances of being selected for verification by the financial aid office. So please consider this. Parents and students who do not use this tool will be asked by each college that you've listed on your FAFSA to go to the irs.gov site, request a tax transcript, and have it sent to them. So if you've listed 10 or more, however many schools have been listed on your FAFSA, those are 10 transcripts that you're going to have to be sending. Now, if you do use this tool, you'll see that you are going to be taken directly into the IRS portal. You want to grab your 2020 income tax return and enter your name and address exactly as it's printed on that return, even if it's misspelled by your tax preparer or you've moved since you filed the return, because the IRS wants to make sure that the person that's on their site is actually the person that filed that return. And then you're almost finished. You've completed the financial sections. You then want to make sure that you are reviewing your student aid report. This is a list of every question you're asked and your answer to that question. So make sure you're reviewing this and going back and making any changes that you see necessary before you submit it, because you want to make sure that the financial aid offices receive the most accurate information so that they can quickly process your financial aid offer. Then you'll see that the student and one parent are going to be asked to sign the FAFSA using their FSA IDs. Most often, when we have parents and students that are having trouble electronically signing their FAFSA, it is because the information in the FSA ID that you created at the beginning of the process is not accurate. Perhaps it was not verified by Social Security. So make sure you're going back to your FSA ID, making sure everything is correct there. And then going back to the student and parent demographic sections to make sure that whatever you put in that ID is exactly what's listed in the FAFSA itself. Once you both provide an electronic signature, you're going to receive a confirmation page. This is a pop-up. This is the only time you're going to get this much information at one time. And some of this information is only going to be reported here in the pop-up. Now, the student is going to receive an email with a bit of this information, but make sure that you're either taking a screenshot of this pop-up page or you are printing it. You're going to find your confirmation number. That's the date and time you submitted your FAFSA. Oftentimes you'll receive calls to say, LSU said they didn't receive my FAFSA. I know I sent it to them. You'll be able to see the date and time, provide that to them. You'll see the colleges that you've sent your FAFSA data to. You'll see a data release number, which is so important. This is the only time you'll see this number. This number can be provided to the financial aid office if you, the student, want them to make some changes for you. So make sure you have this with you. You'll see the steps that you need to take to complete the process. And you can see your expected family contribution as well. Once your FAFSA is fully processed, at that time it's going to be shared with your colleges. Then each financial aid office is going to identify any aid that you might be eligible to receive. Now, if you need to add a school or change your contact info, or you need to make changes that your college did request, and you want to do that yourself, there are a variety of ways. But the easiest is to log back into the FAFSA and make those changes. But please remember that you must sign and submit anytime a correction is made. If your family's financial situation has changed since 2020, it's your responsibility to contact the financial aid office, because they have the ability to use what's called their professional judgment to award you additional aid if they can find it for you. So if you've had loss of income, someone's been laid off, you've had some unexpected medical expenses, please understand that the financial aid office will work with you to provide some additional funding for you, because they are trying to determine your net price. And that is done by subtracting any grants and scholarships from the cost of attendance at their college. Remember that the net price is your responsibility. You can either pay it in cash or you can accept student loans to pay that balance. Your student financial aid offer will come from each college. They should line item your cost of attendance at their school, grants, scholarships, work study, any student loans can offer you. And you want to make sure you're reading it carefully and responding to any requests for additional information. Now, once you determine which college you're going to be attending, you'll want to accept your aid in this order: scholarships and grants, because this is gift aid that doesn't have to be repaid; federal work study, because you've earned that money and you don't have to pay it back; and then student loans. And remember that this is borrowed money that must be repaid with interest. I know that your counselor has talked to you about scholarships. They are gift aid that doesn't have to be repaid. You can find them in a variety of places, but she probably has more information than any other place that you're going to search. So make sure you're checking with her as well. Applying for and winning these scholarships is bottom line going to reduce your cost of your education. And that means you're going to be reducing the balance of your student loans as well. This year, Leela is offering a $1,000 Fafsa Completion scholarship. It's for Louisiana high school students only, those who have completed their Fafsa. And then a $1,000 Choose Louisiana scholarship for students attending a college in the state of Louisiana, because we want to keep you here in the state. Now, for students or parents who need additional help covering their college expenses, Leela does administer a nonprofit education loan program called Leela Choice. Check that out at leelachoice.org if you're interested. And remember, you must submit a Fafsa every year that you're in college. Now, if you haven't already received a copy of Leela's Fafsa Completion Guide for the class of 2022, you can visit our website at leela.org, or you can email me directly. We have come to the question and answer period, and I see we already have some questions and comments. But while I'm looking through those, I'd like you to jot down our Fafsa helpline and then my email address in case you want to talk to me directly. Okay, here's a good question. And I'm seeing now that there's some comments that I've been cutting out. I am going to be providing a copy of the presentation later to Ms. Wren. So hopefully she'll be able to share that with you for those who could not hear the entire presentation. So the first question is, what if you didn't file a tax return in 2020? And that's a good question. You do not have to have filed a return to submit your Fafsa. When you get to the financial section where they ask if you filed a return, you can answer not going to file, or you can state that you are going to file. So you're a little bit late on your 2020 return, but you can still file your return. And when you're in the Fafsa, you can estimate, or you can go ahead and wait until you file that return to complete your Fafsa. If you're not going to file a return, then that's simple. Just state you're not going to file and then provide with the amount of money that you did earn in 2020. Yes, do the parent and child both need a username and password? Yes, that's the FSA ID, and you need a username and a password for the parent, one parent, and the student himself. And this is a question that we're often asked, and yes, if you are a parent who has an older child, or perhaps you were in school, maybe you were in graduate school, and you have an updated username and password, you will use that for each child that you have in college. Just make sure that you're going back into your FSA ID and you're updating it if you've moved or your contact information has changed. Do that before you try to sign your student's Fafsa. Yes, once you file your tax return, you can go back into the Fafsa and update it. So let's say you haven't filed your 2020 tax return yet. You can submit your Fafsa saying that you are going to file, and then you can estimate how much you earned and how much you paid in taxes and submit the Fafsa. But remember, as soon as you get that 2020 return filed, you do need to go back into the Fafsa, select Make Fafsa Corrections, and enter your information. Does anybody else have questions, or parents, if you prefer to unmute yourself and ask the question, I'm happy to entertain those. Was everybody having a hard time hearing me, or was it just a few that couldn't hear?
You were cutting up, but I heard the majority of it.
I'm going to drop my email address in here for you. I know it's on the screen, but please jot it down if you want to talk to me after this. And if you're interested in having a copy of these slides, I'm happy to send those to you. Shoot me an email and I'll be happy to provide you with them. But as I mentioned, I'm going to be providing them to your counselor as well as the recorded version.
I would like to say, this is Miss Wren, that on February the 12th in our school library, we're going to be hosting a Fafsa Completion Day. That's going to be a follow-up to this particular workshop. So anyone who does not have an opportunity to complete the Fafsa, or if you should run into some challenges, or if you wish to have a hands-on assist in completing the Fafsa, October the 12th, Tuesday, in the library, we'll have the students and the parents broken down into blocks. So block 1 will be last names A through F. Block 2 will be G through L. We'll break for lunch. Block 3 and then block 4 will conclude the rest of the alphabet. That's going to be an opportunity for everyone to come in if you run into some challenges or if you'd like the hands-on assist.
That's great. And if you would like to have virtual completion assistance, you can always call into our Fafsa helpline. We're completing Fafsas on the phone with students and parents all year round. So please feel free to give us a call. I have another question. Can we apply for Fafsa before applying to the university? And the answer to that is yes, because the Fafsa data is going to be transmitted to every college you listed on the Fafsa. It takes 3 to 5 days to process, and then it's going to be shot out to the colleges that you've selected. And those college financial aid offices are going to let that data just accumulate there. As soon as the student has been accepted for admissions at a college, they notify the financial aid office and they will pull down your Fafsa data and begin working on a financial aid offer for you. So yes, list all of the colleges that you are considering on the Fafsa. And as I mentioned, you can add up to 10 at a time and get that over to the college. When should we complete the Fafsa? Is there a certain start date to apply? Well, actually, October 1st was the start date, and you would not believe how many people are already trying to get their Fafsas done. So yes, October 1st was the start date for the 2022-23 Fafsa. It's never too late to submit your Fafsa, so go ahead and get that done as soon as you can. Has anybody in our group already completed their Fafsa? Great. Well, remember, if once you submit your Fafsa, you can register for Leela's $1,000 Fafsa Completion Scholarship. So go to our website. As I mentioned, I'm going to pop the web address here. Go to the website and you can apply for that scholarship. Are there any other questions? If not, I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Wren, and I want to thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Carmichael. We certainly appreciate your expertise. To all the families, to the students and the parents, thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Ms. Carmichael said, she's available in various ways through the internet, through reaching out with a phone call. Once I get this recording, I'm going to post it to the students' Google Classroom page. And then keep in mind, mark your calendars that October the 12th in the school library will be the actual live hands-on for anybody who has not completed or would like the additional assistance. I wish all of you a good evening. I thank you for tuning in. Give me a call tomorrow if any of you should have any questions or challenges. And I look forward to working with you all the rest of this year. Y'all have a good night. Thank you so much.